Thank you, Nathan. That was awesome. I am so excited to be here. Well, I'm really excited to be here for the food. I love New York food. There's just like so many different kinds. I live in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, so when I come here, I'm like, every single meal has to be extraordinary. I'm also really excited to be here because I've followed this conference for so long, and it's just incredible. Every year, I'm just like filled with FOMO. So I really thank Gina for inviting me this year. Everybody give a round of applause for Gina for organizing. All right, without further ado, let's talk about composable animation. So before we talk about animating the web, let's first talk about the goal of the web. The goal of the web is first and foremost about communicating. And when we communicate, we share memes to create joy or laughter. We might share politics to talk about confusion and fear. But first and foremost, we're talking about communicating on the web. So why then do we talk about animation? Well, let's think back to your earliest sensory memories. Let's think about the first times you felt happiness, sadness, fear, curiosity. So think about the first times that media, not something in your life, but media made you feel any one of these things. Could it have been Spirited Away, making you feel happy, or sadness and Up in that first scene, or fear from Toy Story, or maybe it was WALL-E for curiosity? Or how about something that made you feel all of them? You see, emotions attach to the limbic system, making things easier to recall. So if I asked you what happened on a random day when you were 5 years old, you might not really remember that. But if I asked you to sing all of the words to Hakuna Matata, you might, or Under the Sea, or something like that. So these cartoons may have seemed like basic line drawings and just simple entertainment, but they gave shape and color to our imaginations and brought life to our internal worlds. Part of the reason why I could do this, what was then so exciting to me and is still so exciting to me today, is that anything can happen. And that's why when we talk about what's possible on the web and how we can make anything happen on the web, we talk about animation. I'm Sarah Drasner, known on Twitter as Sarah Edo, and I work for Microsoft. As stated before, I'm on the Vue core team, and I also work for CSS Tricks. So let's talk about composing some beautiful animations into your design systems. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about animation was those characters and how those characters made us feel. And branding is not dissimilar from those characters. We're giving shape and life to a company. So these disparate elements of typography and color engage us and make a company have meaning, give that company a character. But only when we employ motion do we really bring our site to life. So consider this example where motion is an intrinsic part of the experience. It's not secondary, it's not additive, it's not tacked on, and it's as important an element as typography is on this site. So let's do a quick comparative study. If we look at something like this, which is this really awesome demo by CodeDrops, they have all of these different types of ways of bringing in an image on the side as you hover. And each one is different, right? It's the same kind of motion. The same thing is being revealed, something from the side. But the way that that motion comes in communicates a different type of branding, a different type of experience. And the other thing I want to point out here is the timing is different too. So when people say something like 0.3 seconds for every single animation, don't listen to them, because some of those bounces and pops, they take longer, right? They can't take as quickly as the first ones where we're kind of staggering through things. Those things are a piece of that too. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all thing, which is kind of a bummer. You do want like, just do it this way, but that's not how these things. Yeah, it might make a lot of sense to do something friendly like a bounce, but if you're a bank, you might not necessarily want something bouncing. You know, you don't want to go to the site and be like, everyone's playing with my money, what's going on here? So what's the big deal about easing? Easing can completely change how your animation is expressed. And here's where JavaScript shines a bit over CSS. In CSS, we have two handles, and it's called a cubic Bezier, and animation can be expressed along this curve, which gives us some flexibility. So that's pretty cool. But in JavaScript, we're not limited to 2 handles. So for instance, I can make bounces. In CSS, I would have to write these as keyframes that are individual and go up and down and up and down and up and down. This is one line of code that I can then configure, and I can make elastic, and I can change those configurations, and change all of the different styles, and I can even make custom eases. So I can really, don't ever do this ease. This is crazy. Or maybe do and be the person who makes the site with the horrible eases, and everybody goes there just to see that. So we're not limited to one type of, ease along one type of path. It's really expressive. There's also another type of animation that people don't talk about quite in the same way because it's not dealing with eases. But this is React Motion. There's tons of libraries like this, React Spring. But what this is good for is for gestures. So it's not good for sequentially based animation where you're orchestrating a lot of things that happen at one time. It's really good for single movements that you'd like to look realistic. And you can see it's interruptible. So that's really good for gestures because as you're moving through it, you can actually interrupt it in midstream, which is not possible with some of those other sequentially based animations. All of these code samples are open source, and I also wrote an article on CSS Tricks that's a comparison for animation technologies. I could spend this whole time comparing animation technologies, and actually Val Head has a talk where she does do that too. So if you want to check out those resources, you can go into more depth there. So my suggestion is to not just define one ease, just like you wouldn't just define one type of color for your palette, right? You decide on a primary brand color, and then you have a bunch of different colors. So let's say it's green, and you have a bunch of different greens that you're using, and then you have a strong accent color to let people know something's different, pay attention. So we can do that with eases too. We can have a bunch of different eases that are kind of along the same lines, and then one thing that's like, hey, look at this, something's new, something's different. So if I made this CodePen demo to kind of show this, and so if I open this map marker, and you can see all of the eases are kind of the same, even though we have staggering, and that we have the email, and becomes the submit, and these two become the loaders, which in turn become the success. And the only time you see a different ease is that bounce, right? That bounce was the only time I did something different. All the other eases are the same, and that bounce is there to show you, hey, something's different, something worked, dopamine rush for you, and letting people know that that form worked. So in order to not reinvent the wheel, and I actually stole this slide from Gina, this is a really great slide because it does kind of express the reason why we create these design systems, right? We're trying not to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to make sure that the button over here is not being remade on every page. So we do want to create these beautiful defaults. And I worked on design systems in large companies. I was also a consultant for a bunch of design systems in many companies. And what I noticed was people would really care about the typography and the color and the spacing and make good defaults for those. But animation, man, animation was not very well taken care of. It just wasn't. So we also, if we're going to extend that metaphor even further, if we're going to actually create wheels, we also have to not put the cart behind the horse. And what we need to do is start to understand the animation before we put them in our systems and start to learn how things are being used. So make a few things before we put things in and before we make those beautiful defaults. I mean, think about it this way. You wouldn't decide on a font or a typography before trying it in some mockups, right? So we shouldn't do that for animation. And this is what I mean by this. Every single system I've worked on has this animation. Why? Why? When are you ever using this? I'm sorry, that's like tough love, but like nobody is turning things upside down in their systems. Yet everyone's shipping this code. So yet I don't see things, oh, whoops, let me go back. Okay. Here we go, yeah. Yet I don't see loaders that become successes in any systems, That's crazy. That's something we all need. I mean, consider it this way. If your brand is a character and you're having a conversation with a user, when you submit a form and that submit button doesn't do anything when you click, that's basically like someone walking up to you, handing you a business card, and then you just dropping it on the floor. and looking at them. That's basically what that exchange feels like. When I give somebody my information, it's kind of scary to do that, right? I'm like, I don't know, I'm giving you my email. And then if nothing happens from that exchange and it just freezes on the screen, I'm that user who's like clicking the button a bunch of times, like, United, what's going on? So you want to let the user know that you're on it. This is another code pen I made where, you're just filling out your name and your email and your details, but the submit form, the button becomes a loader, which in turn becomes a success and lets the user know, hey, we took care of you. It also cuts down on perceived wait time. So your users are always overestimating those passive wait times. This cuts down because it allows them to think, look, I'm taking care of you, something else is going on. So we should have an opinion on animation. Having an opinion on animation is really important to bring that character to life. So what does having an opinion for animation look like? So maybe for you, motion complements the gradients on your site by shimmering, like this Rally Interactive example, which I think is really gorgeous. Or maybe for you, it means revealing with a slide and hiding things in a overflow hidden, so that things are slowly being revealed to you every single time you see something. So there's a lot of different types of movement in that one example, but they all come in revealing with a slide. Or maybe for you, motion staggers, where every single time there's an entrance or an exit, it's always staggering, and there's always a consistent delay between how that entrance or exit is made. Or maybe for you and your brand, you use blur to show what's important and to say what's not being used and what's hiding in the background, so that you can kind of let the user know this thing is the thing you should pay attention to. Don't pay attention to the things that aren't important. Or maybe you use filters to achieve beautiful animation effects. Maybe you are a high-class site and you're showing something really super high-class and you want to say, okay, this is something really particular and beautiful and unique. So here's one I made in React where it's a bunch of page transitions, and the thing I'm using again and again to show that that's a little bit particular is this screen. So I'm having a bunch of different lines drawn with red, green, and blue, and they're slowly exposed one by one so you can see each one. So keeping that effect consistent between each page. Again, all open source code that you can check out later. So look around you, study reality. Watch water drip. Watch shadows dance across the wall. Look around you for all of these pieces that can bring physicality to your brand, can make it really feel like it has substance and meaning and depth. It can bring the next dimension of your site to life. And so I'm going to state an unpopular opinion, and even though it's an unpopular opinion, it's actually shared by some other animation experts like Val Head and Rachel Neighbors. Stop using material design as your motion design language. It is not your motion design language. When you look at that motion design language, you look at it and you say, Google. Now that is good branding. That is not your branding. You are spending so much money on your site to make an impact, to make people feel like it's you, to make people understand so that emotions attached to the limbic system, right? So that they can recall you. Anytime you're using Google for your motion design language, you're missing out on a chance to be memorable as you, as your brand. So how might you have an opinion? I made this code pen to show an example. So it has a bunch of do's and don'ts. So you can write down your thoughts, you can collaborate, you can make some rules, make some defaults, and you can communicate them. If you work on design systems, the most important aspect of her adoption, as you know, is communication. But also knowing your audience. So in terms of this motion design documentation, there's a lot of pieces of code in here. And I talk about developer standards and things like that. So this type of documentation would be geared towards design collaborating with developers. It's important to define your audience for documentation early. This is from Val Head and her book, Designing Interface Animation, which is a great book. She's the person I collaborate with for web animation workshops as well. So when we talk about documentation, you have to consider if your documentation is for developers, talk a lot about the code. If it's for marketers who are maybe finding external vendors to create microsites, then of course it's going to have to do more with look and feel. So communicating that motion is a really big part of it as well. And in engineering, we have this term called BDFL. It's benevolent dictator for life. Have a benevolent, benevolent, that's the reason why we use an acronym. Benevolent dictator for life. Have someone who really cares about the animation and makes sure that it gets expressed, but also have some support. Have people who believe in it as well and are ready in meetings to stand up and say, you're right, like, we should do that. A shout out to Rachel Cohen, who was my animation support in the last design system I worked on. So that support is really important, not just for meetings, but also for people to kind of check you and say, hey, did you think about how the animation should do this? Have you thought about it from the design perspective? Have you thought about it from the dev perspective? Okay, so we talked a lot about the whys. Let's talk about the hows. How do we compose animation creating beautiful defaults? So here's a code pen I made to describe how to put these animations into systems. So it's the same small animation, but there are a few different things that I can change here. There's one that has an entrance and one that has an exit, and then I have an entrance emphasis and an entrance and an exit emphasis, and I can also adjust the timing. So if we look at the timing, there's a bunch of different slugs. We have T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, and T5 is a lot, these are a lot like H1, H2, H3, H4, H5. H5 being your body copy. When people on your site create some paragraphs, they're not constantly figuring out what font size or font that it's using. It's already decided. So everybody on your site uses that default H5 or T5. And then from there, you can adjust. You can go up and down, H5, H4, okay, that was too small, H4, H3, until you find the right one. But then everything stays consistent, and they don't need to rewrite that code in order to use it. They're just plugging into that class. We can also have some defaults for easing, so we can store some variables for easing, but this works for both CSS and JavaScript. So here we're storing these, and then we apply these to an entrance class. So nobody is ever going around and hunting for a cubic Bezier ever again. The next developer who comes along and needs to make an animation plugs into entrance. They plug into T5. They know that those are the defaults, and then they adjust from there. And it's just what you need, right? It's what you have decided you need for the site. It's not inventing a bunch of animations and then asking people to use them. It's looking over the system and understanding where they're being used, how they're being used, and applying them then. We're also going to apply animation fill mode both for all of those animations, so that because that will keep the animation from popping back into the first state. So another thing we can do if we have a React kind of code base, and this was a system I worked on that kind of documents and shows pieces of React systems. This company has since pivoted to blockchain, of course. So what we can do is we can have all of these defaults that we can express as props for each one of these parameters as well. So just because you're using a React system doesn't mean that you can't also create these beautiful defaults that work across systems, especially in things where you're extending those components. So we can also compose multiple components together. So we have all of these components, but the thing that we're really paying attention to is there's one wrapper here that actually holds the animation for the buttons coming out. So, I'm going and I'm creating these buttons and adding these labels. And then that component, that floating button component, is the one that holds the animation in it. That's the one that I'm wrapping in order to express the animation. So anytime, no matter how many details I have coming out, that's going to be used. But if we have something really particular, maybe it needs its own component, right? So you can create these beautiful defaults used throughout the system, and then there are some really particular things. Maybe you have a loader that's got a lot going on in it. Those can be encapsulated components as well. So even within these, we have some parameters that we can use. We can change the easing, we can change the timing, and we can make sure that we have all of these things adjustable so that we're not recreating the wheel. In Vue, we have these things called single file components, which if you're not familiar with them, they're pretty awesome. I'm a very biased person, being on the Vue core team and saying this. In the template, we have all of our markup. In the script, we have all of the script. And for the style, we have all the style. You can either say style or style scoped. So scoped would be just for that component. What I typically do is I'll make something like this for a component, and then it's very shareable. And then inside of this loader, I'll import all of my, Sass. So any global styles I'll create in the Sass, and then I'll import those. These go to every single component, but then anything very particular can also be shipped when in that one component. So in a .view file, we have all of that markup living together. So if we have something like these sample view icons, all of these icons are consistent. They, hold a consistent view box size, and then I'm passing in the paths. And then these animation components, these are SVG components that are all just .view files. They have everything that I need in them. They have the SVG as well as the script. And so here's what that would look like. On the SVG, I have an @click method, and then in the script, I have some of my animation. That's attached to the SVG itself, so even if the markup inside the SVG changes, I'm targeting the path IDs, so it will still stay consistent. The designer, as long as those paths in Illustrator or Sketch aren't changing, then all of this animation stays consistent, even if you update the SVG icon. And again, this is also on GitHub, so you can check out all the code for that as well. If you're doing responsive animation, you have to think about touch and hover and click. So here are some libraries I like for some gestures that you can use for the web. So Zing Touch, Hammer, Draggable, Flickety are all really, really great, responsive, kind of allows you to understand. But if you're making them from scratch, remember on mouse over or on touch start, understanding that you need to use both of those in order to create responsive interaction. Another few things to think about for responsive consistency. SVG is great for responsive. It's squishy. I have a whole other talks about this. If you don't know about SVG, I won't go into too much detail here. But they stay crisp on any, on any device. They can be super small, and they kind of are malleable for whatever container they're in. Eases should stay the same, but timing can be adjusted. So sometimes things go across the screen. If the screen is yay big, that timing needs to be much longer than if the screen is smaller, right? Initial scale 1.0 in the meta tag. Otherwise, it'll wait for 300 milliseconds. That's the mobile is waiting for a double tap. And so it will wait, and it will make it seem like your site is less responsive, but unless you put the initial scale 1.0 in your meta tag, then it won't wait for that time. You also need a larger touch target. You need something that's either 40 pixels by 40 pixels so that people's goofy fingers can hit them, or you can use @media pointer course, but that's not fully supported yet, so you should check support charts and what you need to support. All right, let's talk about page transitions, because a lot of the things that I showed you before show these beautiful page transitions, and it's enough for me to be like, make this, and then just like walk off the stage, but let's talk about how you would actually implement something like that. So, okay, I'm going to use a tool called Nuxt. It's like the Next.js equivalent. If you ever use React, Next.js. If you use Vue, it's Nuxt. It gives you server-side rendering. And it's super awesome because if you have a pages directory, you just dump a .view component in there, and it sets up all the routing for you. It sets up the pages, the routing, everything. You don't have to do anything without stepping out of a Vue file. So if we create a page and another page and point them at each other, we already have that slick loader at the top, and all of the routing is set up. Pretty nice. But the other thing it does is it has these hooks for animation. So it already assumes that you might want page animations and transitions in the site, so it allows you to do those for you. So all I have to do to create page animations are to add these classes and add some animation, and I'm all set to go with those transitions. But they also allow JavaScript. Don't ever do this. This is just me messing around. Don't do this to your users. But it allows us to do all sorts of crazy stuff with these JavaScript hooks. And this is what that would look like. I basically plug into this transition inside the script component. But the other thing I have in there is that mode out in. What that's going to do is say, even if the user clicks to change the page, wait until the outward animation is done and then change the page. And that's something really special. Usually you'd have to put some imposed delay and a lot of craziness, so we can, I just clicked, let me go back, cool. So we can create, I made this fake typography site, but you can see how things transition out before they transition in. And that's the thing that's allowing me to do. And they're different per page as well. So I can change all of the animations per page for each one of them. So that's the repo. That's also the demo site if you want to check it out. But let's take it a step further. I showed you native-like page transitions, right? And the web comes under scrutiny because it doesn't allow us to see native-like page transitions. That's something that we don't really get to do, is have things persist. So let's do that. So recently there was this Jira update where they took all of these different elements all over Jira and they actually simplified it. But one thing that they did when they simplified it was communicate it by showing all of the elements that were similar going into one place. And that way of expressing things really helps us as humans. We can't really map individual things to other individual things if it just snaps between things. We can't remember them. But if we do something like this, we definitely can. We can go, oh, I see, they grouped those together and they moved those there. So doing that on our site is really awesome too. So I made this demo where you're kind of going through and checking out different views of this site. And so you can see, different interactions that we might have, but we can also switch users and I can explore, what this person's use is and kind of go between. But you notice she's staying consistent on all of the views for the site. And no matter what, I do keep things consistent, so a few things are persisting on the page. So how do we do that? Well, in our Vuex store, which is kind of like Redux, you have basically this create store, and I'm storing the page inside of that, and I'm also going to make a mutation to change the page. And then in middleware, I'm listening for a page change and committing that to the store, so I'm basically allowing it to hold whatever page I'm on. And I register the middleware in my next config. And so in layouts.default.view, so basically there's a layouts page that goes for all of the components, and that allows me to put a navigation component that stays stable on that page. So it's going to happen for every single page, that one thing. And then I can basically take, that idea and say, okay, if it's this page, move this over here, or change this to move over here, and move them with transforms. The other thing that Vue allows us to do is have transition group components. The transition group component does flip under the hood, which allows us to say, okay, take where this one is at, take where this one is at, and now invert them. And usually those calculations are possible, but really complicated and annoying to do. Vue does that all under the hood for you. There's also, I'm going to show you a library that also does this natively without Vue too. So it's pretty cool. So I just add things to this transition group component, and then I'm able to create some transitions, and it'll make sure that all the elements in there are perfectly hardware accelerated. So then we can get something like this, where everything transitions from page to page without a lot of overhead, and that's really exciting. So I made this, and it's on pagetransitions.com, but there's also GitHub if you want to check out that code. But Simona Kotin, who's my coworker, works in Angular and made a fork of it that went to Angular. And then Sean Wang works with React, and he took a fork of it and made it for React. So no matter which framework you're using, you can achieve these effects and check out any one of these demos and see how they were made. But there's also this really cool thing that came out this last week that shows how to animate the CSS. Oh, sorry, this is my new clicker. I'm getting used to it. That shows us how to animate CSS grid natively, so just without any kind of frameworks. So this GitHub will show you how to animate CSS grid without using frameworks as well. So it's time for us to give life to our work. The world around us drips and it hobbles and it splashes. Our sites are capable of so much more than being static tables and layouts that don't move. We can do this, and we can make them composable animations that work beautifully across our sites and create beautiful defaults for each one of them. So my question for you today is, what are you going to build? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
What a tour. I want to start building Motion tomorrow, or maybe Thursday if I have to be here tomorrow. So Motion is beautiful. It's full of opportunity, and it's still, for some, and maybe me, as you were showing some of these things, intimidatingly complex. Can you talk a little bit about how you gradually, or what techniques you use to bring someone aboard to build that competency?
Totally. Actually, Rachel Neighbors has a really great graph where she shows easy to hard in order to implement, and like necessary to not very necessary, and then you can like kind of plot things along those lines and make sure that you're doing the like easy necessary things first. I think that's a really great idea. So starting with something that really changes, shows up in business goals, like the loader and success. Like, you should have a loader on your site for forms. You should be letting people know that something is successful. So if you can start with something like that, that might actually change numbers, like change the ROI, and is not too hard to actually implement, then you can kind of ease your way into the pond. You might be able to change some stakeholders' ideas about motion, that it's not just, fluff, that it is something that actually aids the user's experience.
I really liked your Cleveland pin example because, in part, I'm from Cleveland. Midwest folks, sorry I left you out in the morning. But I'm curious, it included so many connected pieces, so many elements transforming into other elements, and then it seemed like it came back to a rest state at the end. How do you know how many elements to weave together, and how do you know when you've reached too much?
I think that user testing is always really important, and motion will change depending on what your product is. Again, if you're a financial institution like a bank, probably really small, light touches. I think Stripe does a really good job of using animation that kind of shows things and hides things and becomes part of the experience, but it's never like, hi, I'm animation. It's like the animation's used to kind of display information. So that you can put in these small touches before going crazy or wild, especially if you're, something like that. If you're a site like the Fabergé one, you might have more of a chance to do something crazy because you're a luxury item. Your job may not be to fill out any form on the site. It might just be to make people feel like it's fancy and expensive. If you're a movie, let's say, you might not even be trying to get anyone to go anywhere except go to the movies on their own. So like if you're a Life of Pi, crazy animations, things like that make a lot of sense. But whereas if you're someplace like Expedia, just getting people to their goal and helping them with that goal, so more subtlety and charm.
When you were talking about physicality and our observation that we can make into the environments that we occupy, can you connect that a little bit with both your statement around how can you connect those pieces of motion with a brand's identity? And can you maybe share a story that you've gone through in a project in the recent years where you've culled down into the specific bits that connected identity to motion?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So how do you connect the motion with an identity? And is there a story you can tell us about how you perhaps had lots of potential connections and you whittled it down to
Yeah, definitely. I worked with, I probably can't say the name of this client. I worked with this one client for a while, and we did a lot of kind of user research in terms of what people thought of the brand and where they were trying to go with the brand. And so there was a lot of research that was kind of strange, like looking at YouTube videos of fire crackling and things like that, to kind of understand what people might be thinking in terms of what those pictures evoked and what those kind of things felt like and how to bring them subtly into something. So if you're talking about something like fire, not necessarily having fire on the site, but having little touches that might, evoke flame or something like that. So it's actually kind of more research-based than you might think.
So I have to address this. The whole stop using Google material bit caught me by surprise, maybe many of us. And so as an alternative, if we're not to use Google and we don't have Sarah on our team and we don't have a motion competency in-house, should we do nothing?
No.
Or should we choose Google and bridge to something else?
Yeah. That's a totally valid way of going about things. I just want people to understand that that's a choice towards using. Any choice for motion is also a choice towards your brand. So using Google Material Design, because that's a strong decision for motion, is a great place to start, especially if you are trying to understand how things work and you need a few guidelines and you don't know how to implement things. But I would encourage you to eventually start to move away, start to make some decisions in another direction so that you can kind of, maybe it's as simple as instead of it doing this one thing, we have it do this other thing right at the end. And you can kind of, build off of that over time. But if you use Google Material Design, just keep it in the back of your mind that that's a thing that you're deciding to do. It would be the same as if you decided to use Google's colors or any other brand's colors. It's a decision that you're making to lean on someone else's brand rather than your own.
Your talk was called Composing Animation, and it places motion in a context. And as we discover what the motion is that fits our identity, how do you decide how many contexts do we need to create? How many references do we need to feel to be, or do we need to explore to feel confident that it's captured what we want? Is there a magic number to this? And does it bridge from contrived to feeling like it's a real expression of our own experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same as you would find for a lot of the other things, right? Like some sites, like in this room, probably there were some sites where people were handed a bunch of colors and they had to just make a design system with those colors. There's probably other people in this room who spent, who started off with a certain color and then did a lot of exploration towards colors and typography and the way that those things are evoked. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all thing. And, there are different size budgets, too. Some people can afford to sit and think about these things and do that kind of research, and they have research people on staff. Other people, it's like mayhem, and they've got aggressive product deadlines, and they're trying to get things in. So it would really, change based on what people have on staff, how much money they have to, what kind of resources that they can spend on these things. So I would say that starting, if your budget is small for these kind of things, making some small defaults is a really nice way of making sure that they're composed, but careful defaults too, right? Like asking what is going to happen on the site. Does the menu open? Does a modal open? These are all opportunities for small bits of motion that don't have to be totally extravagant.
So to close, where do you see motion sitting as a potential peer to color, typography, and other properties? And can you project out 5 years, 10 years from now, where would you want us all to be with motion?
Yeah, I guess in 5 or 10 years, I would love for, I don't know if any of you have seen Jen Simmons' talks. She gives really, really wonderful talks about layout and breaking out of our rut. She shows a picture of, a sidebar and a header and a body, and she says, we're stuck in this rut. We need to break out of this rut because we're not making table-based layouts anymore. And that's I feel the same way about motion. I feel like we're still stuck in this rut where things aren't possible that are. And so I think in 5 or 10 years, I would love it if not everything is moving on the web or anything like that, but just small bits of motion that help our brands come to life. So seeing, I mentioned MailChimp before. I don't work with MailChimp, but their colors are lively. Their whole brand gives me the sense that they're very friendly. So having motion that complements that and feels like a friendly type of, joyful bounce or something is a good way of bringing motion to a brand that is friendly. So considering where you're at and what your typography and color and those things convey, and then extending that a bit with motion.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Sarah.